Hello, and welcome back to Let's Play The Elder Scrolls 3, Morrowind, Let's Play The Elder Scrolls 3, Morrowind, Game of the Year Edition. Once again, it is story time. So let's get reading, starting with On the Preparation of the Corpse, Volume 1, The Acquisition of the Corpse. While the arts of necromancy are only illegal in the province of Morrowind, few citizens of the Empire have an enlightened view of our art. Thus, the acquisition of corpses on which to experiment is often difficult. In Cyrodiil, a few necromancers who have served the Empire are given the corpses of criminals and traitors to use legally. This provides those who have acquired such a post with a fresh supply of corpses, most of them young, strong, and intact. In Morrowind, the outlawing of necromancy would make its practice impossible were it not for the fortunate institution of slavery. While the temple will investigate obvious signs of necromancy, such as hastily emptied graves or ash stolen from one of their ash pits, a careful and discreet necromancer can thrive in Morrowind by taking slaves at a modest rate. Most will assume the slave escaped or died in the Ashlands. Finding suitable corpses in Black Marsh is nearly impossible due to their rapid decay. There are also diseases, Argonian tribesmen, and other difficulties that must be dealt with. I know of only a few slowed necromancers who operate successfully in Black Marsh, and even they stay near coast. While the forests of elsewhere pose some of the same problems as those of Black Marsh, the deserts preserve corpses for hundreds of years in a way that requires very little preparation. Khajiit of the desert tribes are often buried with only a small cairn of stones, which are easy to find and uncover. The Khajiit show remarkably enlightened indifference to graves being uncovered. It is said that in the port of Nchuleft, one may purchase anything one desires. This is true if you desire fresh corpses. While few Bosmer perform Arkay's rituals when burying the dead, the more primitive Bosmer still practice cannibalism upon their enemies, which reduces the number of available corpses. As would be expected from such a backwards people, they have an intolerance of necromancy that goes beyond all reason. Many necromancers who practice our arts in Valenwood become one with the trees themselves. Somerset Isle is even worse in some ways. Some Altmer born into the most respected, noble, and scholarly families are actually allowed to study the dead in the open. Their research, however, seems to be centered on finding ways to extend their lives even further rather than the more practical uses of our art. A necromancer of any other race caught in Somerset Isle can expect the worst possible punishments. In Hammerfell, where worship of Arkay is strongest, the dead are almost always subject to Arkay's law. There are exceptions after large battles or in remote areas where death occurs far from meddlesome priests. Fortunately, the dangerous terrain and creatures in the deserts and mountains of Hammerfell makes the acquisition of corpses possible, though they are often in poor condition and require special care and preparation. The newly formed Orsinium presents a unique opportunity. As you know, orc corpses are among the most sought after for the durability of their skin and the strength of their bones. If King GotY will listen to reason, we could offer the services of our art in defense of his young nation, in exchange for disposing of the orcish dead. A mutually beneficial arrangement, as I'm sure the orcs will agree. To this end, a delegation has been sent to Orsinium, though we have not yet heard any word on the state of these negotiations. In my native High Rock, traditions dating back to the Witch Kings and nomadic horsemen mandate cremation of the dead. This is practiced almost without exception in the north, though an imperial burial in a tomb or city cemetery is more common in the south. There are still many corpses easily taken from the battlefields of the War of Bettany and the lawless times that followed. There are even rumors that King Gothard of Daggerfall may institute the imperial practice of donating the corpses of criminals for necromantic study as a deterrent to the bandits and pirates that still threaten the Iliac Bay. In Skyrim, the cold weather and isolated terrain allow a few necromancers to operate freely. Alas, the availability of corpses is limited to Nords who die from exposure or in battle. While the cold is preservative, the snow makes these corpses difficult to find. More research dedicated to the magical detection of corpses would be invaluable to the necromancers of Skyrim. The Slode are the most famous necromancers, but little is known of their native Thras. In Tamriel, Slode only practice necromancy on other races. It is uncertain whether this is true in Thras as well. If so, it would explain the number of slaves that are purchased in Terre by Slode merchants and the rumors of Slode airships carrying corpses from Senchal. These difficulties lead many necromancers to create their own corpses. While I prefer to work with those who have died a natural death, A more expedient approach is sometimes necessary to further the study of the art. While the arts of necromancy can be practiced on animals, such experiments rarely produce interesting results. The servant's ability to follow directions seems to be related to the subject's intelligence in life. While raising the corpse of a man, elf, or beast man can produce a useful servant, the corpses of animals produce mere guard dogs at best. Often, a raised animal is unable to distinguish its master from the rest of the living, and many amateur practitioners have been torn apart by the animal servants they created. Let such stories be a lesson to you. And next, the Axeman. Of all the members of the Morag Tong I've spoken with, none disturbed me as much as Minos Toric. A quiet and reserved man who never drank, never visited a brothel, or even uttered a curse, he was famous for his ability to make people disappear. Once a person was targeted by the Brotherhood and Toric was sent to them, they would simply cease to be. I asked him once what his weapon of choice was, and was equally startled by his answer. "I only likes to use axes," he said in his typical quiet voice. The image of this silent, dour fellow attacking anyone with a weapon as inherently bloody and violent as an axe so frightened and intrigued me that I questioned him about it further. This is an inherently dangerous activity, for assassins are not typically keen to give out their stories. Toric did not mind the questions, though it took some time to get the full story out of him, as naturally shy and reserved as he was. It seemed that Toric had been orphaned at a very young age and sent to live with his uncle, a salt rice plantation owner in Sheogorad in northern Vardenfell. The man promised to show his nephew the business and eventually make him a partner when he was old enough. In the meantime, the boy was put to work as his uncle's house servant. It was a grueling life, as the old man was very particular about how things should be done. The boy was first required to give all the floors in the house a thorough scouring, from the attic to the cellar. Whenever the floor was not cleaned to the uncle's satisfaction, which was frequent, Toric was thrashed and forced to begin again. The boy's second duty was to ring the bell that would bring the laborers into the house. This was done at least 4 times a day, once for each meal. But if his uncle had any news or additional instructions for the laborers, which he frequently did, the bell might need to be sounded a dozen times or more. It was a huge iron bell in the tower, and the boy quickly discovered that he had to throw his entire body into the motion of pulling the chain in order to have it sound loud enough to bring everyone in from the field. If he was tired and did not pull the back-breaking chain hard enough, his uncle was soon at his side to beat him until he rang the bell loud and clear. Toric's third task was dusting all the shelves in his uncle's vast library. As deep and old as the shelves were, he was required to work with a long, heavy duster on a rod. The only way that he could reach to the back of the shelves was to hold the duster at his shoulder and then swing it out in a sweeping motion. Again, if the uncle saw any dust left over or felt that the boy was not working as hard as he ought to, the punishment was swift and severe. After several years, Minos Toric grew into a young man, but his job responsibilities were not increased. His uncle promised to teach him the business once Toric had demonstrated his mastery of his servile assignments. Divorced from any knowledge of any work other than his own, Toric never knew how badly in debt his uncle was and how poorly the farm's yield was. In his 18th year, Toric was called into the cellar by his uncle. He thought that he had not done a good enough job scouring the floor down there and was frightened of the beating to come. What he found, however, was his uncle packing his goods into crates. "I'm leaving Morrowind," he explained. "The business has gone sour, so I thought I'd try my luck running a caravan in Skyrim. I understand there's good money to be made trading fake Dwemer artifacts to the Nords and Cyrodiils. I wish I could take you with me, my lad, but there won't be much need for scouring, bell-pulling, and dusting where I'm going." "But, uncle," said Toric, "I can't read. I knows nothing of the business you promised to teach me. What wills I do's on my own?" "I'm certain you can find a job in some domestic capacity," shrugged the uncle. "I've done my best with you." Toric had never stood up to his uncle before, and felt no anger, only a sort of coldness that gripped his heart. Among his uncle's possessions being packed away was an old heavy iron axe, allegedly of Dwemer manufacture. He picked it up in his hands and was surprised to find that it was not much heavier than his dusting rod. In fact, it felt very comfortable as he pulled it over his shoulder and swung it out as he had done so many times before. In this instance, however, he swung it into his uncle's right arm. The old man screamed with pain and rage, but for some reason, Torek didn't feel frightened anymore. He propped the axe against his other shoulder and swung it out again. It cut a swath across the old man's chest, and he fell to the floor. Torek hesitated before lifting the axe above his head. It was another natural position for him, like he was ringing a bell. Over and over again, he swung down as if he was calling the laborers in from the field, except that this time, there was no sound except for a wet thump, and no laborers came in from the field. Of course, his uncle had sent them away hours before. After a time, there was nothing left of his uncle that couldn't be washed down the cellar drain. The process of cleaning up came easily to Torek as well. Blood scrubbed up much quicker than the usual grime and salt rice flour that littered the cellar floor. It was well known that Torek's uncle was planning to leave Morrowind, so his disappearance provoked no suspicion. The house and all the belongings were sold to the debt collectors, but Torek took the axe. It seemed that his uncle had given him some worthwhile business skills after all. And next, the Prayers of Baranat, a traditional myth. When the Lady Yennefer was kidnapped from her estate and held for ransom, her mother sent word out that whoever rescued her would be allowed to marry her and inherit the land. Unfortunately, in those troubled days, kidnappings, murders, and thievery were rampant, and there was a dearth of able-bodied adventurers for such assignments. In fact, the only person who answered her call was a skinny little fellow named Baranat. "You are certainly brave, but I fear you would never survive," said the old woman. "My daughter, you see, has been kidnapped by the Corabale brothers, whose physical prowess is the stuff of legend." "My lady," said Baranat, "when I was born, I was blessed by Vivec, Almalexia, and Sothasil, and I have the ear of the saints. If I run into any trouble, I'll call on them to aid my quest." Doubtful, but having no other prospects, the old woman sent Baranat off, explaining that the four brothers' camp was to the north. In the center of the camp, the eldest and most powerful brother, Aaron Corabale, was holding Lady Yennefer personally. Each of his brothers guarded a different post along the valley. Baranat would have to defeat each to rescue the lady. Baranat rode many miles through the northern swamps before he came to the first of the brothers' guard posts. There he saw Vanis Corabale, the youngest of the brothers, watching the valley for intruders. Vanis was known to be faster than the wind, a warrior who could thrash his opponents before they even unsheathed their weapons. Baranat took a look at his sad, cut-rate iron blade and prayed to the saints. Saint Veloth the Pilgrim appeared before Baranat in shining robes and smiled upon him. "Baranat, put down your blade, and I will make you swifter than a bolt of lightning." Baranat dropped his blade and ran at Vanis, moving so fast he didn't rustle a leaf with his pace. In a flash, Vanis was dead by Baranat's hands. The adventurer continued on until he reached the second youngest Corabale brother, Farron, who not only was as fast as Vanis, but so strong he could rip a trama shrub up by the roots with 2 fingers. Baranat hid himself and trembled as he looked at the giant Farron Corabale. Again, the young adventurer prayed to the saints. Saint Nerevar the captain appeared before Baranat in golden armor and smiled upon him. "Baranat, I will make you stronger than 100 warriors." Baranat rushed at Farron, knocking the giant through a boulder which turned to dust on impact. Farron tried to get to his feet, but Baranat tore him apart, scattering him across the valley floor in 87 pieces. Beyond Farron's post was a raging river where the second eldest Corabale brother, Horus, stood guard. Horus, who was faster than his brother Vanis, stronger than his brother Farron, and so tough that he could swim in the lava of Dagoth-Ur like it was the Patamaic Ocean. Baranat thought of his own tolerance for pain, which was minimal, and prayed to the saints for help. Saint Rorus the Martyr appeared before Baranat with flesh like sparkling gems and smiled on him. "Baranat, I will make you unyielding as the heart of oblivion." Baranat rushed at Horus, and the two plunged into the rushing river. For 12 hours they wrestled one another under the water, until Horus could hold his breath no more and drowned. Baranat pulled himself out of the river and continued down the valley until he reached the camp. Aaron Corabale himself was there, guarding a squirming sack, which Baranat assumed either contained Lady Yennefer or several large cats. The young adventurer quailed at the prospect of doing battle with Aaron Corabale, the swiftest, strongest, sturdiest, and most accomplished fighter of the brothers. He prayed to the saints for help. St. Olms the Just appeared before Baranat in a burst of flame, and smiled on him. "Baranat, I will make you more cunning in battle than the most dangerous of Daedra." Baranat walked calmly into the camp and began battle with Aaron Corabale. The fight lasted 7 days, and for 6 of them, Aaron had the upper hand. He rained kicks and punches down using the arrhythmic style the Khajiit call Goutfang. He parried and blocked in all the fashions of the great Nordic warriors. He maintained his balance, coordination, speed, strength, timing, and tactics as the moons rose and fell from the sky. But on the 7th day, as he was preparing his killing blow, he suddenly stopped, eyes wide open. The blood drained from his face, and he realized the trap he had stepped into. A trap with no escape. With 3 quick flashes of his hand, Baranat completed the cycle of blood, the old Redguard fighting style he had begun on day 1. Aaron Corabale breathed no more. The young adventurer ran to open the sack where Lady Jennifer lay. His first surprise. She had a face like a dreg, and as she began to berate him for taking his time, he realized that she had a very, very, very unpleasant personality as well. Several days later, when they were back at the old woman's court, he discovered that the estate that he would be inheriting was utterly dissolute by decades of blight storms and poor crops. Saint Delin the Wise watched the young adventurer from a cloud in the sky and smiled on him. "Baranat, before you fight, find out what you're fighting for." Okay, let's continue. The other books are in this chest. The 36 Lessons of Vivec, Sermon 5. Finally, the simulacrum of the Netchi man's wife became unstable. The Dwemer, in their haste, had built it shoddily, and the ashes of Red Mountain slowed its golden tendons. Before long, it fell on its knees beside the road to the lands of the Indoril and pitched over, to be discovered 80 days later by a merchant caravan on its way to the capital of Veloth, Anon Almalexia. Vivec had not been among his people all the days of his pre-life, so he stayed silent and let the Chimer in the caravan think that the simulacrum was broken and empty. A Chimeri warrior who was protecting the caravan said, "Look here how the Dwemer try to fool us as ever, crafting our likenesses out of their flesh metals. We should take this to the capital and show our mother Eam. She will want to see this new strategy of our enemies." But the merchant captain said, "I doubt that we shall be paid well for the effort. We can make more money if we stop at Nurmok and sell it to the Red Wives of Dagon, who pay well for the wonders made by the deep folk." But another Chimer, who was wise in the ways of prophecy, looked on the simulacrum with disquietude. "Was I not hired on to help you seek the best of fortunes? I say you should listen to your warrior then, and take this thing to Eam, for though manufactured by our enemies, there is something in it that will become sacred, or has been already." The merchant captain took pause then, and looked on the simulacrum of the Netchi man's wife, and though he heeded always the advice of his seers, could do no more than think of the profits to be made at Nurmok. He thought mainly of the Red Wives' form of recompense, which was 4-cornered and good wounded, a belly magic known nowhere else under the moons. His lust made him deny Eam, his mother. He gave order to change course for Nurmok. Before the caravan could get underway again, the Chimeri warrior who had counseled a passage to the capital threw his money to the merchant captain and said, "I will pay you thus for the simulacrum and warn you. War is coming with the shaggy men of the north, and I will not have my mother Eam at uneven odds with one enemy while tending to another." "Nerevar," the merchant captain said, "this is not enough. I am triune in my own way, but I follow the road of my body and demand more." Then Vivec could not remain silent any more, and said into Nerevar's head these words, "You can hear the words, so run away. Come, Hortator, unfold into a clear unknown. Stay quiet until you've slept in the yesterday, and say no elegies for the melting stone." So Nerevar slew the merchant captain and took the caravan for his own. The ending of the words is Almsivi. And next, nope, that's my inventory. Here we go. Chronicles of Nchuleft. This is a chronicle of events of historical significance to the Dwemer freehold colony of Nchuleft. The text was probably recorded by an Altmer, for it is written in Altmeris. 23. The Death of Lord Illindam. It happened in Second Planting, PD 1220, that Lord Illindam, on a journey in the western uplands, came to Nchuleft, and Protector Anchard and General Urkuntunch met him there, and Dalen Zanchu also came to the meeting. They talked together long by themselves, but this only was known of their business, that they were to be friends of each other. They parted, and each went home to his own colony. Blutanch and her sons came to hear of this meeting, and saw in this secret meeting a treasonable plot against the councils, and they often talked of this among themselves. When spring came, the councils proclaimed, as usual, a council meet in the halls of Bams Amshend. The people accordingly assembled, hand-fasted with ale and song, drinking bravely, and much and many things were talked over at the drink table, and, among other things, were comparisons between different Dwemer, and at last among the councillors themselves. One said that Lord Illindam excelled his fellow councillors by far, and in every way. At this, Councillor Blutanch was very angry, and said that she was in no way less than Lord Illindam, and that she was eager to prove it. Instantly, both parties were so inflamed that they challenged each other to battle and ran to their arms. But some citizens who were less drunk and more understanding came between them and quieted them, and each went back to his colony, but nobody expected that they would ever meet in peace again together. But then, in the fall, Lord Illindam received a message from Councillor Blutanch, inviting him to a parley at Hendor Stardums. And all Illindam's kin and citizens strongly urged him not to come, fearing treachery, but Lord Illindam would not listen to counsel, not even to carrying with him his honor guard. And sadly, it came to pass that, while traveling to Hendor Stardums, in Shinsinch Pass, a host of foul creatures set upon Lord Illindam and killed him, and all of his party. And many citizens said thereafter that Blutanch and her sons had conjured these beasts and set them upon Lord Illindam, but nothing was proven. Lord Illindam lies buried at a place called Leftunch. And finally, The Firsthold Revolt by Mavis C. You told me that if her brother won, she would be sister to the King of Wayrest, and Riemann would want to keep her for the alliance. But her brother Helseth lost and has fled with his mother back to Morrowind, and still Riemann has not left her to marry me. Lady Gialine took a long, slow drag of the hookah and blew out dragon's breath, so the scent of blossoms perfumed her gilded chamber. You make a very poor advisor, Kale. I might have spent my time romancing the King of Cloudrest or Alinor instead of the wretched royal husband of Queen Morgaya. Kale knew better than to hurt his lady's vanity by the mere suggestion that the King of Firsthold might have come to love his Dunmer queen. Instead, he gave her a few minutes to pause and look from her balcony out over the high cliff palaces of the ancient capital. The moons shone like crystal on the deep sapphire waters of the Abyssinian Sea. It was ever springtide here, and he could well understand why she would prefer a throne in this land than in Cloudrest or Alinor. Finally, he spoke. The people are with you, my lady. They do not relish the idea of Riemann's dark elf heirs ruling the kingdom when he is gone. I wonder, she said calmly. I wonder if as the king would not give up his queen for want of alliances, whether she would give herself up out of fear. Of all the people of Firsthold, who most dislikes the Dunmer influence on the court? Is this a trick question, my lady? Asked Kale. The Trebite monks, of course. Their credo has ever been for pure Altmer bloodlines on Somerset, and among the royal families most of all. But, my lady, they make very weak allies. I know, said Gialine, taking up her hookah again thoughtfully, a smile creeping across her face. Morgaya has seen to it that they have no power. She would have exterminated them altogether had Riemann not stopped her for all the good they do for the country folk. What if they found themselves with a very powerful benefactress, one with intimate knowledge of the court of Firsthold, the chief concubine of the king, and all the gold to buy weapons with that her father, the King of Skywatch, could supply. Well armed, and with the support of the country people, they would be formidable, nodded Cale. But as your advisor, I must warn you. If you make yourself an active foe of Queen Morgaya, you must play to win. She has inherited much of her mother Queen Baranzai's intelligence and spirit of vengeance. She will not know I am her foe until it is too late, shrugged Gialine. Go to the Trebite Monastery and bring me Friar Lilim. We must strategize our plan of attack. For 2 weeks, Riemann was advised about growing resentment in the countryside from peasants who called Morgaya the Black Queen, but it was nothing that he had not heard before. His attention was on the pirates on a small island off the coast called Caluis Lar. They had been more brazen as late, attacking royal barges in organized raids. To deliver a crushing blow, he ordered the greatest part of his militia to invade the island, an incursion he himself would lead. A few days after Riemann left the capital, the revolt of the Trebite monks exploded. The attacks were well coordinated and without warning. The chief of the guards did not wait to be announced, bursting into Morgaya's bedchamber ahead of a flurry of maidservants. "My queen," he said, "it is a revolution." By contrast, Gialine was not asleep when Cale came to deliver the news. She was seated by the window, smoking her hookah and looking at the fires far off in the hills. "Morgaya is with council," he explained. "I am certain they are telling her that the Trebite monks are behind the uprising and that the revolution will be at the city gates by morning." "How large is the revolutionary army in contrast to the remaining royal militia?" asked Gialine. "The odds are well in our favor," said Cale, "though not perhaps as much as we had hoped. The country folk, it seems, like to complain about their queen, but stop short of insurrection. Primarily, the army is composed of the monks themselves and a horde of mercenaries your father's gold bought. In a way of thinking, it is preferable this way. They are more professional and organized than a common mob. Really, they are a true army, complete with a horn section." "If that doesn't frighten the Black Queen into abdication, nothing will," smiled Gialine, rising from her chair. "The poor dear must be beside herself with worry. I must fly to her side and enjoy it." Gialine was disappointed when she saw Morgaya come out of the council chambers. Considering that she had been woken from a deep sleep with cries of revolution and had spent the last several hours in consultation with her meager general force, she looked beautiful. There was a sparkle of proud defiance in her bright red eyes. "My queen," Gialine cried, forcing real tears. "I came as soon as I heard. Will we all be slaughtered?" "A distinct possibility," replied Morgaya simply. Gialine tried to read her, but the expressions of women, especially alien women, were a far greater challenge than those of Altmer men. "I hate myself for even thinking to propose this," said Gialine. "But since the cause of their fury is you, perhaps if you were to give up the throne, they might disperse. Please understand, my queen, I am thinking only of the good of the kingdom and our own lives." "I understand the spirit of your suggestion," smiled Morgaya, "and I will take it under advisement. Believe me, I've thought of it myself. But I don't think it will come to that." "Have you a plan for defending us?" asked Gialine, contorting her features to an expression she knew bespoke girlish hope. "The king left us several dozen of his royal battle mages," said Morgaya. "I think the mob believes we have nothing but palace guards and a few soldiers to protect us. When they get to the gates and are greeted with a wave of fireballs, I find it highly likely that they will lose heart and retreat." "But isn't there some protection they could be using against such an assault?" asked Gialine in her best worried voice. "If they knew about it, naturally there is. But an unruly mob is unlikely to have mages skilled in the arts of restoration, by which they could shield themselves from the spells, or mysticism, by which they could reflect the spells back on my battle mages. That would be the worst scenario. But even if they were well organized enough to have mystics in their ranks, and enough of them to reflect so many spells, it just isn't done. No battlefield commander would advise such a defense during a siege unless he knew precisely what he was going to be meeting. And then, of course, once the trap is sprung," Morgaya winked, "it's too late for a countering spell." "A most cunning solution, Your Highness," said Gialine, honestly impressed. Morgaya excused herself to meet with her battle mages, and Gialine gave her an embrace. Cale was waiting in the palace garden for his lady. "Are there mystics among the mercenaries?" she asked quickly. "Several, in fact," replied Cale, bewildered by her query. Largely rejects from the Psijic Order, but they know enough to cast the regular spells of the school. You must sneak out the city gates and tell Friar Lillum to have them cast reflection spells on all the front line before they attack, said Jeeleen. That's most irregular battlefield strategy, frowned Kale. I know it is, fool. That's what Morgaya is counting on. There's a gang of battle mages who are going to be waiting on the battlements to greet our army with a barrage of fireballs. Battle mages? I would have thought that King Riemann would have brought them with him to fight the pirates. You would have thought that, laughed Jeeleen. But then we would be defeated. Now go. Friar Lillum agreed with Kale that it was a bizarre, unheard-of way to begin a battle, casting reflection spells on all one's troops. It went against every tradition, and as a Trebite monk, he valued tradition above every other virtue. There was little other choice, though, given the intelligence. He had few enough healers in the army as it were, and their energies could not be wasted casting resistance spells. At dawn's light, the rebel army was in sight of the gleaming spires of Firsthold. Friar Lillum gathered together every soldier who knew even the rudimentary secrets of mysticism, who knew how to tap into the elementary conundrums and knots of the energies of magicka. Though few were masters of the art, their combined force was powerful to behold. A great surge of entangling power washed over the army, crackling, hissing, and infusing all with their ghostly force. When they arrived at the gates, every soldier, even the least imaginative, knew that no spell would touch him for a long time. Friar Lillum watched his army batter into the gate with the great satisfaction of a commander who has counteracted an unthinkable attack with an outrageous defense. The smile quickly faded from his face. They were met at the battlements not by mages, but by common archers of the palace guard. As the flaming arrows fell upon the siegers like a red rain, the healers ran in to help the wounded. Their healing spells reflected off the dying men, one after the other. Chaos ruled as the attackers suddenly found themselves defenseless and began a panicked, unorganized retreat. Friar Lillum himself considered briefly holding his ground before fleeing himself. Later, he would send furious notes to Lady Jeeleen and Kale, but they were returned. Even his best secret agents within the palace were unable to find their whereabouts. Neither had, as it turns out, much previous experience with torture, and they soon confessed their treachery to the king's satisfaction. Kale was executed, and Jeeleen was sent back with escort to her father's court of Skywatch. He has still to find a husband for her. Riemann, by contrast, has elected not to take a new royal concubine. The common folk of Firsthold consider this break in palace protocol to be more of the sinister alien influence of the Black Queen, and grumble to all who will listen. And that concludes this episode of Storytime with Fedar Moc. We just read On the Preparation of the Corpse, Volume 1, The Acquisition of the Corpse, The Axeman, The Prayers of Baranat, a traditional myth, The 36 Lessons of Vivec, Sermon 5, Chronicles of Nchuleft, and The Firsthold Revolt. Fedar's got a few things he needs to take care of now that he's back in town, and he'll get on that in the next video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.